But before I do crisis management, so the next week when we meet, the next week, 24th, I'm bringing along Dan Wolf. Did you get the message about this? Did you hear? I'm bringing a guest speaker. Dan is the Deputy CEO of Unexim Bank. Oh, not Unexim Bank, Unexim Group. So he's Prokhorov's number 2. And it would be good if you let people know that, you know, we've got the opportunity to actually sit. This is on Saturday morning, the 24th in the morning. And I'll tell the university to circulate it. But he is a very interesting guy, and he's the number 2 to Prokhorov. So it makes him a very interesting guy. And when he's here, we're going to talk about leadership. And the way that I do that is that I interview. We sit here and I sort of talk about what it was that made him a leader, how did he become a leader, you know, what were the characteristics that came out as he became, as he grew through his. Yeah, it's a tripwire. You know, I've already done that. But I think I'm just the reason I'm sort of hesitating is when I left you last time, we had really not talked about characteristics of leadership, right? We'd only talked about the role of the CEO. We hadn't talked about characteristics. Let's see if this works. Yeah. We didn't talk about characteristics, no? Or anybody remember? I looked at the video. We didn't talk about it. So, who's your favourite leader? Anybody got a favourite leader? Think of your favourite leader, past or present. Past or present, living or dead, real or fiction, male or female or neuter. Name your favourite leader. Somebody. Come on, you must have a favourite leader. Somebody has got to come up with a favourite leader. It's not a test.
Maybe Lomonosov.
Lomonosov, okay, cool. I know nothing about Lomonosov. Except that he founded a university or something.
Yes.
Okay, so here he is. Lomonosov. Okay, and he founded it in St. Petersburg or not? No. Where did he found it? Okay.
He's the founder of Moscow State University.
Okie doke. Okay, we're going to do 2 things with him. We're going to talk about, first of all, we're going to say what's special. Okay? And then once we've done what's special about him, we're going to think what skills did he use. And then we're going to talk about what. Now you're wishing you didn't come up with this. It's too late. Characteristics. Okay. So here's the idea. And listen, I think you should all. You know, we've got Lomonosov, so we'll deal with him, and we'll deal with one more. But the idea is to start thinking about leaders, not in terms just of, oh, they were leaders, but actually to look through it and to say, well, actually, what was going on there? First of all, why? Let's talk about Lomonosov. Why was he special? What was special about Lomonosov?
He had a thirst of knowledge.
He had a thirst of knowledge, which is, oh no, I've got a pen. He had a thirst of knowledge. What's this? Can you make that more specific?
He did the research in such many areas,
yeah.
From chemistry to mathematics.
Okay, so the point is that so first of all, he had a thirst for knowledge. We're talking at the moment, why is he special? And the thing that's special is he had this real desire for knowledge, and he was very broad. He wasn't very specific, so he did chemistry, he did what other things? Maths?
And literature.
Okay. Who does chemistry and literature? Nobody I know. Broad, maths. A lot of people maths and music, because maths and music go together, and if you play Bach, apparently that's just like doing maths, or so I'm told. Anybody play the piano? there must be one person. There's a Russian class, you know. I'm not going to. Of course, there's somebody that plays the piano, but Bach is like is mathematical.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've been told. I had a friend. This is, by the way, another thing. And this friend was she was an intensive. She did lung transplants, heart transplants, kidney transplants. She wasn't somebody you wanted to meet, really, because you know she would do all these transplants, and she worked 24-hour shifts. And what I loved about her was that she'd come back in the morning, and she'd start playing the piano. And depending on how tough the shift had been, she'd play different musicians. So you know if it had been an easy shift, it was Chopin. If it had been a really hard shift, it was Bach. Haydn was somewhere in between. Tchaikovsky was really bad news, whatever was going on. And then the best part about this was, so I had to listen to all this, music, which was perfect. And then she'd go quiet, and then she'd watch The Simpsons, the cartoon series The Simpsons, for like 2 hours. And so what it was that she was simply processing all of the stuff that had gone on the night before through music and then through mindlessness. Anyway, that's off the track. Broad maths and chemistry and literature. Okay, so he's broad. What else is special about him? He didn't. Hey, listen. He didn't just.
He was a very poor guy from fisherman family.
Okay. So then it raises the question. Actually, it's always interesting when people come from, unexpected backgrounds. And you say, okay, well, where does this knowledge come from? Where does the DNA come from? And you say, well, the DNA for a nuclear scientist, well, his dad was a nuclear scientist, his mother was a physicist, and that's why they're a nuclear scientist. And then occasionally you get these people, what did your dad do? Or my dad was a fisherman, my mother, worked in a fishing factory or something, and you can't see the linkage between, the person's skills and characteristics and the skills and characteristics of their parents. Although often, by the way, just because you happen to be a fisherman, you can be a very determined fisherman. You can be a very courageous fisherman. You can be, the characteristics that you exemplify in a role that isn't apparently a high-level role can be just as important as the characteristics of leadership. Leadership just has certain characteristics that produce that you notice in leadership. But if you're a great fisherman, you're very focused on how you fish. You get up very early. You work very hard. You have courage when the fish is pulling. Those are characteristics that the son, had within him through that DNA, which had nothing to do with the skill base, because you didn't have to be a mathematician to be a fisherman, but you may have to have been courageous to be a fisherman. So okay, so he came from a poor background. Yep. And what else? Well, there's something pretty obvious else, by the way, and that actually has to do with, teaching, which is that I could be incredibly interested in knowledge, and I could do a lot of reading, and, I could be very broad, but if I never walked into this room and talked to you, that knowledge would be inside me. So one of the things about teaching, which is a great thing, which I love, is it's not just that you have a thirst for knowledge, but you have a desire to quench the thirst of others. It's not just that you're thirsty for knowledge, but actually that you take that thirst and you spray everybody with a little bit of the knowledge. Some of it sticks and some of it doesn't. But the point is that you have a desire to pass that knowledge on. And I think that's an essential, that you should choose your professors carefully, because if they only are interested in knowledge, then they should go away and write books and do PhDs and be very clever. But they're not going to be people that communicate or try and communicate in a teaching environment. But he had more than that. Presumably, so this will tell you, because I really don't know about him. He set up a university?
Yes, and he was the first Russian national academic in a Russian academy. Because it was an academy with many with many foreign researchers and.
So it was only clever people from overseas. There weren't any Russians there.
Yes.
And he was the first.
He was the first.
Okay, so
It was the 18th century.
yeah. But so he was the first. But he also, but then he went on to set up a university. Is that right? The Lomonosovich, right? So let's think about that. So now let's think about. So what we've decided, what we've got here, is a fisherman's son who has a thirst not only for knowledge but to spread knowledge, who has an interest not only in a specific subject but a broad range of subjects, and has the I call it being comfortable in your skin, has the self-confidence, the sense of self that allows him to break barriers. Because a lot of leadership is about breaking barriers. You know, if you're going to lead, you're not going to follow. There's something incredibly, write that down. If you're going to lead, you're not going to follow. In other words, you're going to have to be prepared to break through barriers. And breaking through a barrier requires courage. And it requires going from your known to your unknown. I mean, this is a very important part of the development of who we are as people, is are you prepared to go from what you know and are comfortable? Does the coffee machine work? Is the coffee working out there? It is? Okay, hang on. I'll finish my sentence and then I need some coffee. So this thing about leadership is going from this is what I'm comfortable with to this is something that I'm not comfortable with, but I have the courage to do. And in this guy's case, he actually went from, you know, being a fisherman's son to acquiring this information, and then not being because it's also there's a lot of people that plateau. You know, there's a lot of people that find their level. And by the way, finding your level and not being an exceptional leader, there's nothing wrong in that. And a lot of people get very hung up about the idea, oh, how do I become the best in the business, or how do I run the company, or whatever it is. There's no need to feel that way. If it's in you to feel that way, go ahead, that's fine. But reaching a level of specialization, you know, there's a guy I work with, if you met him, I'm not going to introduce him to you. If you met him, he is the very picture of an accountant. Of an accountant that doesn't want to get involved with anybody else. He kind of sits there and really he looks like all he wants to do is tick boxes. And he's incredibly good at it. And he spent 20 years ticking boxes. But you know what? He's almost a professional snowboarder. You know? So the fact that you've got one view of somebody, which is that, oh, this person is maxed out, they're not the leader, they don't want to be a manager, and then you put them in this box over here, it's only one part of their life. And it's perfectly possible for those people to excel, to be interested, and to blossom in other parts of their life. There's no requirement. There's nothing that says you've got to be a leader. But there is something that says I need a cup of coffee. So we'll just take 2 minutes. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need it. Who else needs coffee? Come on, let's go get some coffee and then we'll... Let's get back in the room. Do you know, I do find it very amusing that you're not allowed to sell drugs, apparently. You know, if I was to come in here and say, okay, who wants some marijuana or a couple of grams of cocaine or whatever, you know, I'd be taken away and arrested. But if I was to say, let's have some coffee, well, that's perfectly okay. But this stuff actually is an incredibly strong drug. You know, once a year I kind of go for a spa thing where I stop drinking and all that stuff. It's not a problem. If I stop drinking coffee, I go into sort of massive withdrawal. So enjoy your coffee.
Actually, it is not a drug. You will feel this thing for a short period of time. Yeah.
Well, hey, you only feel cocaine apparently for a short period of time. So I mean, you know, I'm not sure that the definition of drug is how long it lasts. You know, the thing about drugs, I think the definition of drugs is that you like it so much you keep having more of it.
In this case, yes.
Yeah, okay. So theoretically. I'm so glad that's on video. Right, so we're talking about this guy. Now, what I want to do with this guy, we've established that he's broken through boundaries, we've established that he's got some of these special characteristics. But obviously, before he can demonstrate, or there are two parts to what he does. One part is skill, which is that he's a skilled administrator. If he didn't know how to create an organization, he wouldn't be able to build a university. If he didn't know how to motivate people and have a system of motivation, he wouldn't be able to get the professors to work for him. If he didn't know how to create grading systems, he wouldn't be able to get students to want to perform at levels higher. So what he's doing there is he's using actual skills that I can't teach you those skills particularly, but these are the skills I was talking about last time we met, which are the skills of leadership: how to run a meeting, how to build an organization. Those are the skills. But of course, just skills won't get you there. The skills will make you a very good technician. And if you want a skillful PowerPoint person or whatever, then they go off to PowerPoint school, they learn how to do PowerPoint, they come back, they can do PowerPoint. That's great. But that has nothing to do with leadership. You see, the thing about leadership is it's the mixture of skill and characteristic. And what interests me about leadership is what are the characteristics of leadership, not because I'm able to teach you characteristics. I mean, that would be a nice thing to be able to do, but unfortunately, well, we'd need to be together for months. and anyway, I couldn't do it. Because you're the person, you individually, through your interactions with other people, through your own self-awareness, through the way that you react to situations, develop your characteristics. And some people have an easier time of this than others. So some people, which is why I hope, my queen, she has a rather easier, now you could say, does she have leadership characteristics? It's quite interesting because she certainly has leadership skills. She knows how to wave her hand. and when she's knighting people, she doesn't take their head off. I mean, there's certain and she can walk in a long dress without tripping over. These are sort of skills of being a queen, I guess. And she can keep the crown on her head because she stands upright. These are skills. But actually, the question is, did she get born with the characteristics of, as it were, leadership? And the fact is that she was, from the age of 0, surrounded by input that caused her to develop her leadership skills. Now, of course, some kings and queens have proven to be very weak. And then, of course, you have all sorts of other problems. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that actually some individuals get born with a DNA which comes down through their generations, that's reinforced by their environments, where actually they get a slightly easier time of it. But of course, some guys, Castro, he was middle class, but the point is that his leadership skills, came from leading a guerrilla warfare, came from creating a desire for change, and a lot of his leadership skills came from his experiences. Now, the reason we're going to have a conversation now about characteristics is not because I think it's important whether that you're born with them or whether you're born or whether you get them through experience. What's important is that you learn to identify what these characteristics are, because if you can identify what these characteristics are, you can reinforce them. I can't offer you a bowl of sweets, and on the sweets there's one for courage and one for independence and one for, it doesn't work like that. But when we talk about, now we're going to talk about this guy, Lomonosov, right? So we've established that he's got these skills, administrative skills and stuff like that. let's think about what his characteristics were. What were the characteristics that this guy was able to demonstrate?
First is courage.
Yeah. And do you know what? When I get to talk, when we get to talk about, of course, you must have very good eyesight, because I can't see that this says courage. So I don't know how you're meant to. I wonder if I have another one. Doesn't matter. That says courage.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, I'll try it over here. Do you think these work on there? Will these work over there? Are they permanent markers, do you think? Yeah, maybe.
We can see
No, because it doesn't matter. Look, these things. No, it's back on it. It's back on it. You don't. The point here is, I've got a file that I can share with you. I'm not trying to. This isn't going to, work. It isn't terribly important what I write up. So courage. Courage isn't something. Courage is something you can develop. I am naturally a coward. My natural instinct is that I'm a coward, I think. When I was at school, I was beaten up. If I saw a big guy, I'd run away. My natural kind of like born instinct is a coward. But because I was in certain situations, I was kidnapped when I was 10. And my father sent me to Aikido to learn Aikido for 8 years. I developed a set of skills. Now, I don't think that I went from being a coward to a brave guy because I went to these lessons. I developed a set of skills that enabled me to leave that cowardice behind because I was empowered with a set of skills. And in the same way that I'm going to recommend to you that you try and develop certain skills that will help you move your characteristics along. The idea here is to develop the characteristics. So one of them is courage. Let's have another one. What else?
Maybe insistent.
He was persistent.
Persistent.
Persistent. Persistent is this is next the last meeting that we have is when I'm going to talk about successful failure. That's when I'm going to talk about how you recover from failure. And persistence and courage are absolutely essential core characteristics of being able to grow through this period. Because if you don't have, persistence and you don't have the courage to persist, well, the first time you fail, that's the last time you fail. Because you never want to get back up on the horse. And so this is fundamental. What else? The reason I'm doing this is not because of Lomonosov. I hope you understand. It's because I'm trying to make you think, what are the characteristics of leadership? What makes it, what makes leaders?
Well, he was a good politician after all, so I don't know how can we call these characteristics, but he was a sort of flexible.
Okay, that's right.
Attentive to what other people may want from him or in general.
Well, hang on. If you're flexible and if you're attentive to what people want, you have to be able to do something. I haven't got an itch. You have to be able to listen. You can't be flexible if you can't hear. You can't be responsive unless you hear. So now you may say, let's look at Donald Trump like we talked about last time. There's a man that I don't think I don't know even why he bothers to have ears. There's a guy that doesn't seem to be doing a lot of listening, except he has political instincts. But so politicians listen. They're flexible. Now, careful here, because if you push that flexibility around too much, you're going to lose my favourite word, which is integrity. So if I'm all things to all men, and I'm prepared to say to you that I represent, this, and the moment that I've got you on board, I go over here and say, oh, and I'm prepared, and I'm, I really support you. Gun control. I think gun control is very important, and I believe every man should have an AK-47. At some point, they clash. And the problem with, and so as a politician, you know, I mean, this is the problem with politicians, is that they sometimes move their positioning according to what they believe is the most effective for them. But fundamentally, a politician is flexible. They have good listening skills. A listening skill. Even as you describe people, as you think about people, and we'll do a couple of other leaders. When you think about it, it's a listening skill, the ability to listen. But the ability to empathize is a characteristic. Do you know the difference between listening and empathy? I can listen to you all day long, but if I don't empathize with you, I don't care what happens to you. You come in, you know, I mean, to make it extreme, you come in, you say your child's being run over and it's broken its leg and it's in hospital, and so I listen to you and I understand that your child has a broken leg, but so what, let's get on with the class. That's a lack of empathy. Doesn't mean to say I didn't hear, just means to say I wasn't in a position where I felt the need to be empathetic. And by the way, in leadership, you also have to be a little bit careful here. Let me go on a side road for a second, which I like to do, which is, where do you draw that line between involvement in people's personal lives in a business environment and standing back? Because, well, do you have any views? Do you have a view? Do you think you should be, you know, do you think you should know a lot about people's private life as their manager or as their leader? What? Sorry? No?
Maybe it's nothing bad about knowing about their private life, but it's well wise not to always interfere with this.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just hold that. Any other opinions? Do you think it's a good thing to know about the private lives of people that you work with?
So I think that
I could do a vote.
yeah. For example, a manager or a CEO
Yeah.
of a company should be aware of every person's not maybe in personal life, but for example, he should express and show to his team that he's care about the team. For example, if someone of the team has a problem, and if that person will understand that he work in a company with the director who's care about him, it will be appreciated by this employee, I think. It will gain much more points to this kind of...
Okay, let's... Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody disagree with that? So basically, so the point here is...
Not to be that you don't care. So
Yeah.
you need to be involved in the process, involved in
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it really depends on the culture, because if in the culture, for example, in the United States, people know everything about roles, so there is a corporate role, there is personal life, and if somebody will try, a leader, a chief will try to get there, he will receive a strict no. And I think in Russia it will be another story when people just wait while the chief will just discuss their personal life with him, because they think that it is important.
Very interesting.
Yes. And
As Russians, you would expect your boss to be interested in who you are and what's going on in your life.
I'm not sure that we expect, but if...
But you respond positively when somebody is.
Yes, it is expected that the boss is not just a machine, it's just
Right.
a person.
It's funny, when you said culture, I actually thought what you were going to say is, because there's culture by geography, and then there's culture by size of company, by type of company, by history, in other words, IBM, has a culture. An internet startup has a culture. Citibank has a culture. And these are corporate cultures which, particularly if they're multinational, they extend as a culture across different geographic cultures. And one of the things that, of course, that I worked in 11 countries for Citibank, one of the things that made it so fascinating was this interplay between how you enforce, well, I say enforce, how you maintain a global culture and how you make it local. Because if you simply come in and you say, listen, you all work for Citibank now, and so anything Russian that you think about is irrelevant because you work for an American organization, it's not going to last very long. Likewise, if you say, you work for Citibank, but don't worry what they think in headquarters, because here in Russia we're going to do it differently, that's not going to last very long either. So multinationals have this challenge, which is how to maintain the core of the corporate culture and adapt it to the local environment. Now, and then obviously you also have this cycle of development through startup, through mid-sized to large companies. And in each of those stages, certainly when you start as a team, everybody's a buddy, everybody out, on Fridays you go out, you get drunk, you spend lunches together, you kind of in each other's pockets because you're a small group. But you make that company into 5,000 people, and it doesn't work like that. You have individual units that work like that, but it can't operate as a culture. Actually it was quite interesting when I did Soyuz Bank, and it's a Russia culture thing. Once a year, you have a Christmas party, and so once a year, and what happens in a big company. I guess in small companies too. The girls disappear around. No offense against girls, sorry. This is no man, woman things. But the girls disappear around, lunchtime, and then they reappear around 7 o'clock. And you hardly recognise them because they've been to the hairdressers and they look glamorous. And, they've got fantastic gowns on, and the guys have all gone off and they've, had haircuts and they're wearing their best suits. And suddenly you have this, and it is very important. The Christmas party is very important. People, when I've talked about that, maybe it isn't important to you. When I went, I had 3,500 employees towards the end at Bank Soyuz. And as an experiment, I sent out a questionnaire on the internet, and I said, I can pay you each $100 cash, or we can put that money towards a Christmas party. And it was 95% we want the Christmas party. We don't want the money, we want to have that experience. And my God, those are big parties. And Lagotenko would come and play, and we'd have it at Expo Center, and and it was a big, big party, and I always had to leave. Oh, here's a piece of advice if you become a boss. Leave your corporate party by no later than 11 o'clock. Because nobody wants to see the boss drunk, and nobody really wants to have the boss see them drunk. And what goes on after 11 o'clock is up to you. But as a... actually, that reminds me of another story. Oh, no, I can't do it because we're on camera. Never mind. I'll tell that story another time. It's about it's about corporate parties and PR risk. Let's just leave it there. But so let's get back into this, how personal you can be. If you get too personal, you can't make rational decisions. If you're impersonal, you run the risk that people don't bond with you, you don't bond with them, and so you don't get an esprit de corps. You don't get people saying, I'll go the extra mile for you because I like you. But the fact is, as a boss, as a leader, actually you're not really trying to be loved. You can't afford to do that. You can't, because in the room, here we are in a room full of different people, I can't make you all love me. I can't make you all like me. Because some of you will like some of my characteristics and others won't. And if the basis of my leadership comes because I've established an individual relationship with each and every one of you, where each and every one of you thinks that somehow you're my big buddy, I've got to keep changing who I am, because otherwise, you know, the person that likes the cold, logical guy versus let's get drunk on Friday night versus, you know, somebody that never shows any emotion. How do I manage everybody's expectation? And if I'm trying to run you as a group on the basis of your personal relationship with me, it's going to fall apart because you're all individuals. So this idea, and it's a common mistake, especially of young leaders, is that they think that what they've got to do is be everybody's buddy. Hey chums, let's go out and have drunk. Yeah, let's get drunk. Yeah, it's great. Oh yeah, yeah, you know. And they come away thinking they're one of the gang. But they're not, they're the boss. So this thing about creating empathy whilst maintaining some distance. Not in a negative, cold way, you know, I told you always talk to people in elevators, you know, that don't create an arrogance, but don't try and be everybody's friend. And because apart from anything else, you're going to go through a period where you're going to be firing people. You can't, you know, it makes that whole process, it stops you from making rational decisions if you particularly like some people. And leadership is a basically lonely business. And I've noticed, for instance, you know, when I set up this club for the CEOs of the foreign banks, and we still meet, even though I'm not a CEO, that group of CEOs really bond, even though they're direct competitors. So we have a dinner next week, for instance, and there'll be 12 CEOs. There are no delegates, so you can't go to this if you're the deputy CEO. It's not an institutional thing; it's the individual leader. And the reason why we bond so much, and then we all, back in the day, we all had different types of banks. Some they're all foreign, but some are like Unicredit, which are, you know, have acquired large Russian banks. Some like Citibank have been purely organic. Some like HSBC are somewhat niche and grew to a certain size but no bigger. So it's not like all the banks are the same. But the one thing that every CEO faces is the loneliness of that corner office. And the loneliness of that corner office, in my opinion, I mean, of course, never take anything that I say as a rule. Everything that I say is a suggestion, and you know, according to circumstances, break it. But if you make friends in a management role with somebody, it's very corrosive for that person because they become teacher's pet. So actually, you think, oh well, if I'm just friendly with you because you're a nice guy, we get on, you know, this and that and the other. What does everybody else think? They think, oh, you know, he's got the retail division and he's got an extra $5 million marketing budget because he's buddies with the boss. And it may have nothing to do with that. You know, the $5 million that he's got is because he's more profitable, or that I see that he has more opportunity. It doesn't matter what it is. But if the perception is that somehow we're close, you know, as friends, it will distort other people's views. So in this leadership game, be prepared to be lonely. And that's why leaders like to hang out with other leaders, not because they trade stories about the executive loo, the executive toilet. You know, it's because they feel that loneliness. So you have to be quite careful about that. Let's get back into characteristics. I've actually, let's just get one more leader out of the way. What are we, 7:45? Okay, we've got plenty of time. So, somebody else's leader. Choose another leader. Yeah.
Last class you mentioned Hitler, so let it be Hitler.
Okay, but but you're going to be, okay. I said it could be Hitler.
Yeah. It's not a positive guy, definitely.
No, don't forget, leaders are not, you know, if I said name a good leader, or name an honourable leader, then you can't name Hitler. But if I say name a leader, then you can name Hitler. Okay, let's talk about Hitler. What made him special?
He managed to get these people like Goebbels, him together.
Oh, so he got a good team together.
Huh? Sorry?
He got a good team together.
Yes, yes, and he managed to...
Like-minded team. They all shared the same basic ideas, values.
Yes, and also this team managed to spread these ideas across the whole nation.
Okay, but hang on. So any leader, by the way, I mean, unless you're truly exceptional, you need to have a team. I mean, particularly if you're in the business of managing a nation. You know, very few people are able. I mean, Jesus Christ did a pretty good job. You know, but then he had some special, skills and characteristics. But he was a prophet, and prophets actually they need disciples. You know, the whole thing. You know, you have the 12 disciples because as an individual, I can't spread it out far enough. My span of control, my ability to actually reach out, and I think I talked about. I'm sorry if I repeat myself, but if you're in the 19th century and you're an American politician, right, or an English politician, one of your key skills has to be having a loud voice. Because if you're trying to get to 200 people in a room, because you haven't got a microphone, the 200 people in a room have to be able to hear you. It means you have to have a big voice. And the problem with a big voice is if you keep doing this and you do it 5 times a day, and you do it every day for months on end, you lose your voice. So a skill for a politician, back in the old days, before you had PA systems and video and all the rest of it, was physical lung capacity. And your physical, and actually, sorry, by the way, we'll get back to Hitler, don't worry. But by the way, physical strength, I don't mean, I can lift you up. I mean endurance is very important to leadership. This is, look at this perfect body. No, I mean, I'm not suggesting, but you have to be able, and actually I doubt that I could be a proper leader now, because I don't think I have the energy to do a 14-hour day when you have to. And when you're in a leadership role, I'm actually reading an interesting book, which I'll get. I'll tell you now because I've put to the photograph. Here's a. If you want to read it's an interesting. I'm only about a quarter of the way through it. Take it or leave it as a concept. It's called the 4-Hour Week. Anybody heard of it? Make a note of it. It's a guy called Tim Ferriss, Ferriss. Tim Ferriss, Ferriss. And it's called the 4-Hour Work Week. And there's a lot of concepts in there about the 4-hour work week as opposed to working forever. And there's a lot of concepts about how time efficiency is one element, but actually effectiveness is another. So I was actually, last time we met, talking about how to run meetings, how to use time management. He actually throws that concept out, and he says how to be effective with time, not efficient with time. But, if you get the chance, have a look at it. Back to Hitler, because we shouldn't forget Hitler, ever, by the way. So he was able to, he acted like a lightning rod. Do you know what a lightning rod is?
Yeah.
When you have lightning, you have to have a piece of metal so that it goes down rather than blows up your house. He acted as, he reflected the German nation. He was able to tap into fundamental insecurity. Insecurity born of the Versailles Peace Treaty, born of hyperinflation, born of a great country brought to its knees, creating the need inside people to blame somebody. See, one of the things when we get to my favourite topic of successful failure is, one of the most important things about successful failure is blame yourself, don't blame other people. If you blame other people, you'll never learn the lesson. But a natural reaction of all of us, initially, is this has gone wrong, but it wasn't my fault. You know, somebody else is to blame. So Hitler was able, the thing you started with, he got Goebbels and the rest of the crowd together, like-minded people. But before he did that, he had to write Mein Kampf, and he had to have in his mind, he had to be able to draw out, to be able to vision, to create a vision that he could then use as a magnet to draw people inside his concept. And this idea of creating the vision, of being able to make it something that people want. If you can't do that, you actually can't do a lot of the other things. So being, and sort of people then think, oh, visionary means you have to be Steve Jobs. You know, no, I mean, there's extreme cases of it. But even at the sort of low level, you have to, even though you're not trying to change the world or anything like that, I mean, he was trying to change the world, but you know, even in, I want this company to be the best company, and these are the things that we'll represent. You've got to be able to kind of bring this vision together before you get your team. I mean, to make, I had Soyuz back, right? I mean, I inherited a group of people that didn't have any sort of vision because they didn't need one. They didn't need one. But you needed to at least start to establish, well, this is, okay, let's forget for the moment where we are. This is what we want to become. And I think in Hitler's case, he was able to create this vision, which then caused him to be able to bring in his team. And then his team acted as his disciples. And then, of course, you need the environment. Because certain leaders don't work at certain times. I mean, I run the risk of being, you know, the world's biggest Churchill bore. Because I am reading this, you know, Martin Gilbert's biography, which is 5,000 pages. Can you imagine a biography of 5,000 pages? So I don't think I'll ever finish. But it's, you know, if you read the life of Churchill, in the First World War, he was the Lord Admiral, he was the head of the Navy. He ended up down the Dardanelles in Gallipoli. He was then blamed for Gallipoli and fired from the war cabinet. He found a way back inside, and then, by the way, I'm now in 1921-22. What's he worried about? He's worried about the 20,000 British soldiers in Russia fighting the Bolsheviks, alongside the Czechs who are defending the Trans-Siberian Express, or Trans-Siberian Railroad. I mean, so there's a guy. He's gone from being the admiral. He gets blamed. He's thrown out. He comes back into the cabinet. Then he's thrown out altogether. And for 10 years, the guy is just like everybody. Everybody says yes, he's a smart guy, but he's completely irrelevant. And I wish he'd stop talking about these damn Germans and rearmament and, you know, God, what a pain. And then 38 comes along and people, you know, 39 comes along, and here's this man, he is the man, and he's 62 or something. I mean, he's my age. And suddenly he's relevant again. So the point that I'm trying to make there is that you need to create your vision, you need to get your disciples, you need to be able to, you know, extend this, and then you need the environment that needs you. You know, which is always this interesting thing about whether, you know, politicians lead or reflect. You know, does the politician create the environment that causes people to follow him, or is the environment such that people focus on that particular individual? And I'd suggest to you with Mr. Hitler that he had a certain set of skills. He was a great orator. I mean, and you know, if you listen, I don't suggest you listen to too much of it, by the way. You know, particularly not these days, or anywhere, anytime. But you know, don't start downloading a lot of Hitler speeches and then say, oh, it's because you know, Mr. Lawson said we should do that. You know, thanks a lot. But if you You see, let me try and do it for you. Let me try and do it for you. Life is complicated. We never really know what the answer is. But if we believe in the future, if we begin to imagine a life after this, if we can embrace, do you see where I'm going? It's the tone, it's the pace. It's not actually what I'm saying. Actually, I was kind of like making it up, obviously. But it's not what I'm saying, it's the pace at which I'm saying it. And then you take people, that's what Hollywood films do. I mean, it's that Hollywood moment where blah, 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 you know, because, you know, the boy's lost the girl and, you know, and they'll never meet again, you know, and then you can manipulate people. I mean, I think I told you last time, you know, Lagotenko, Ilya, Mummy Troll, my best friend in Russia, one of my best friends. I mean, I watch him take the crowd, do this, do that, do this, do that. I mean, it's completely manufactured. It's just a set of skills that the guy has. But it's this business of changing tempo. It's also imagineering, creating images. If you can tell a story and create the image of that story, people get excited. People get involved. Maybe at this point I'll tell you about one of my stories. I am trying to get my book. My book is translated into Russian. So there's 9. By the end of the class, maybe next time we meet, at worst I will photocopy my 19 stories from 11 countries, so at least you get to read them. I'm going to try and get them published in Russian. And just to check, how much detail did I talk about, or did I talk about Kenya? Did I talk about Kenya? I did? I did.
No, you created the case.
Well, I know I created the case, but I was going to run through it. You read it, right?
Yeah.
You did your homework?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. But I wanted to, by the way, did you all bring your homework? Oh, did you put it online?
Yes, put online.
Okay, fine. So you can't now change it. I'm 27 years old. For some reason, Citibank has made me the head of the corporate bank in Kenya. Friends of my family own a house which looks exactly like an English baronial house, except that it has 4 tame giraffe sitting in the garden. Daisy, Daffodil, John Paul, and Daisy, Daffodil, John Paul, I can't remember. These beautiful giraffes sitting in the garden in front of the manor house. I was a little manager in a tiny little office in Edinburgh, and now I'm in Kenya. I have 5 servants. I've never had any servants before, obviously. I have 5 servants. I have a Range Rover. One of my clients comes along and gives me a Walther PP gun and a license to carry it. I mean, I was in the school army, you know, and that's the most I ever did in terms of, you know, knowing what to do with the gun. Okay, I still got hair at that point. I have 20 people working for me. I have a house on the beach in Mombasa. The weather's amazing. People are very friendly, and by the way, they're very friendly for 2 reasons. They're very friendly, and I'm the head of the corporate bank. You know, so I get a lot of invitations to parties, and embassies, and things like that. What could possibly go wrong? On August the, I can't remember if it was August 1st or August the 2nd, to be honest. That night, like every Saturday night, I got in my Range Rover, I drove to the Tamarind, which was a nearby restaurant stroke discotheque. what I used to love about this place, I took my gun out, took the clip out, took the bullet that was in the breech out, right? So I got the bullet magazine, put that into the magazine, gave the magazine with the bullets in to the security guard who put it in the safe, put the gun back in my holster. You know, so took my jacket off, so now I'm dancing with my gun, right? Drinking vodka, I didn't know I was going to end up in Russia. Drinking vodka like it was going out of style. At 3 in the morning, 2 or 3 in the morning, I'm 27, so give me a break. I go back to the security guard. What I loved about this process was I was obviously like, I got to go home, you know. He said, oh, here's your bullets, I'll take them. You know, I put the gun in my pocket and I start driving home.
After vodka.
After the vodka. And as I get close to my house, because that's of course when I'm going to get jumped, I take the gun out. I put one in the breech, take the safety off because otherwise it won't go off, and I drive with one hand with the gun out the window. I mean, this is the most dangerous thing you could possibly imagine. You know, a drunk Englishman who doesn't know how to use a firearm, late at night with bad eyesight, driving a Range Rover in the middle of Africa. I mean, this is not a good combination of things to have. And when I hit that roundabout, and there were a bunch of these very large African guys with very large guns waving at me, my day hadn't slightly changed. My life had completely changed. In 1 second, in one moment. And if in that particular moment, a lot of people got killed during that. I mean, you have to look it up, like 2,000 people got killed or something. I mean, I was waving my gun out of the window, because I always did. And I was weaving all over the road. And by the way, when I saw them, I thought that this was a party. It's like, hey, how's it going, guys? That moment changed me completely, which I didn't realize at the time. I had no concept of it, because I had no preparation for it. And now I'm not suggesting that each of you are going to, run into a similar situation, but you can't forecast moments in your life that are going to change your life, because they don't come advertised. I mean, sometimes pressure builds, things start to happen, and you start to see that things are going to change. But many, many times, things that happen in your life that create this shift in your characteristics happen for extraneous reasons. And it's how you respond to them and how you then deal with the consequences that will develop your leadership capabilities. Now, in that African situation, let's talk about the African situation. What do you think, because you've all written your stories now, so we can share, right? It's all in a system somewhere. I'm not giving away anything. You're being very quiet. If we talk about the case study now, it's done. You've all put it into it. Or I can talk about another case study. Has anybody not put the Kenyan case study inside the system? Everybody's done it. Okay, so let's talk about it. Sorry, I don't know the way you work, mechanically. So what do you think? What are the essential things that you've got to start to do in this situation? What you're Stuart Lawson? What do you have to do? What's the first thing you have to do?
Stop and think, relax.
Actually, it's very true. Most people react viscerally. Fear. Actually, and we can get into the presentation, I tend not to bother about following specific presentations, as you may have noticed. But what do you think most people actually do in a crisis?
Panic.
Yeah, but how does that panic come across? What do you think that actually results in? What do people actually...
They stop and frozen.
They stop like, I call it rabbits in a headlight. They just don't know what to do. It's outside their experience. Never happened to them before. They're looking for input, but there's no input. And if you haven't had that prior experience, then you've got no frame of reference. And so the first thing, well, actually it's two. It's one part of it is you panic and you do nothing, And then the other part of it is you panic and you do something crazy. It's just, you do something, anything. You don't think it through. But actually in a business environment, I'm not talking about in a physical environment. By the way, do you know the joke about, I've got to get this right, about the two guys with a bear, and as the bear's coming towards them, one of them's putting the shoes on, running shoes on. Do you know this? Yeah, something like that. Okay. So there's a bear coming, two guys in the woods. One guy leans down, starts doing his running shoes. The other guy goes, Jesus, Stuart, you're never going to outrun that bear. And Stuart says, well, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. But actually, most people don't go there. So now, what's the next thing that happens?
Communicate.
What?
Communicate. Just.
What do you mean communicate?
I think it's a communication plan. So what you should to the people and to your customers.
Yes, but I'm going to get to the crisis. Oh, this is not a crisis. Yes, but before you can communicate, you have to do something else.
I would say that you should take some practical steps, like organizing a security guard for the office,
Yeah.
or maybe moving your personnel to the embassy, which is supposed to be guarded, or something like that.
Well, what you're talking about is physical security.
Well, that's it.
I mean,
First part.
and actually, one of the things that people talk about is continuity plans. Crisis plans. Actually, Citibank issues folders which you open according to the situation, and each, so you have sort of civil disturbance, coup, blah blah. And in each one, there is a certain set of things that you have to do. So, for instance, I'm not talking about the physical security of the staff. I'll come back to that. But one of the things that you had to do was destroy the money. We used to have traveller's checks. Does anybody know what a traveller's check? You're probably too young, but traveller's checks were physical pieces of paper, like checks, like money, but that you actually sold. And people could take them with them overseas, and then they'd be valid overseas. So it was like taking foreign currency. And we had great stocks of it. We had millions of dollars. And actually, one of the first things you had to do was either burn it or shred it. The problem with shredding it was that it took too long. The problem with burning it was that the middle of the pack didn't burn very well. But back to, and the problem with all of it was very tempting to say, well, I'll just keep a little bit for myself. So physical security. When people talk about having a continuity plan, the point about a continuity plan is if you don't do it beforehand, it's not a continuity plan. Once the event has happened and you haven't done it, you're kind of shit out of luck, as they'd say in America. So, for instance, a continuity plan, an emergency plan in a place like Kenya, we didn't have mobile phones in 1981. Right? So you had to physically have people's addresses, you had to have their home numbers, you had to have the numbers of the people that lived next to them, you had to have as it were, an order of battle, so that you had people who were monitors, like monitors. So on one road, because the roads were widespread, you're in the countryside, you'd have one person who'd be responsible for 5 other people, and you called that one because you don't have time. See, one of the things about a crisis is you need to do a lot of things all at once, because a crisis is unforgiving in terms of execution. In a crisis, what happens in a crisis is that time accelerates. I can't remember which video game I used to play, where you were shooting and then you had a special button and everything would slow down and you could shoot everybody because it was in slow motion. That's the way that a crisis happens, is that time accelerates, because impacts of events, the impact of any particular event is far greater within the context of a crisis than it is in a normal environment. And there's far less margin of error. If you are in a normal, standard environment where, and I'm talking in business terms, where you've got revenue growth of 5% per annum, and you're fighting over market share, well, you've got plenty of time to sit there and think about, well, where am I going to put my R&D, where am I going to put my capital expenditure, how much inventory am I going to have, what terms am I going to offer to my clients, and then you can sit in a room and you can spend 3 or 4 hours, you know, talking about that and coming up with a plan, and then you're going to analyse the competition, you're going to analyse the marketplace. But I can tell you that in a crisis where you don't know, you don't know where your personnel are, you don't know where your clients are, the terms of but once the crisis has happened, of course you're Russian, so you've seen this stuff. But once the crisis has happened on December 18, when the interest rate goes up and the foreign exchange rate goes down, and everybody's trying to get money out of the ATM or buy their Mercedes before they run out, you know, the fact is that things are going to happen very, very quickly. And market share, the opportunity to take market share or lose market share is massive because of the requirements in a crisis that mean that time accelerates. I actually got ahead of myself because I was talking about Kenya. So if I can get to Kenya, okay. I can't, because I haven't got my one at a time. Let's talk about what else should happen in Kenya. So we've talked about physical security. You have to worry about your staff, first of all. You have to worry about your premises. I mean, okay, you have to worry about the staff. By the way, you know, as a manager, you're not the army. I mean, all you can do is gather information. If somebody's been injured, you can't drive out and take them to the hospital because you'll get shot. You know, you're not in a position. It's a very complicated position because what you're doing is you're information gathering, but your ability to execute in that environment is very minimal. And what happens is you go directly into curfew, 6 to 6 curfew, 9 to 9 curfew, where you can't move. So what you have to do is you then have to say, within the confines of, and I'm talking now physically, and we were very lucky, we had some people that were injured, but we didn't have anybody killed. Within the confines of this new environment, I have to create whatever assistance I can to the families who have problems by calling families that are nearby. And all of that's impossible unless you had this original continuity plan. And because we were Citibank, and by the way, there was no real prior notice that this was going to happen. We had that telephone system that meant that we could call the monitors that could then look after the roads and report back. So at least we knew where the problems were. Because one of the first things you need in a crisis is you need to know, what's gone on. Facts. You need fact gathering. What else do you need to do in this situation? What's the next stage?
Estimate risks.
Yes, and then when we're talking about risk, what are we talking about in terms of risk? What types of risk?
Operational risk.
What do you mean by operational risk?
Okay, so in this case, we made the access to our main building may be blocked.
Yeah.
So this is a loss of premise. Another one, loss of staff, which you have already discussed.
Yeah.
Third one, our counterparties.
Yes, good. You've got a good set going.
Yes, because
Do you have some more? Hang on. This is okay. Keep going.
The reason is why I used to work for business continuity at Citibank. That's
No. Terrific. Oh, what a shame. Did you know about the fire in Gashika?
Yes, I got an award for this because I managed to maintain this, and that's why Citibank didn't lose its primary premise at Gashika 6. No, Gashika 8, 10.
No, but I'm talking about Gashika 1. I'm talking about Ducat 1.
Yes, so Ducat 3 is Gashika 6, and
Yes.
Ducat 1 is Gashika 8, 10. Yes.
This is a very specific conversation, you understand, everybody, right? But you're not old enough to be. You weren't there in 1995.
I'm 95. Oh, sorry. 25.
What?
25.
Yeah, but I'm talking about something that happened 5 years after you were born.
No, my team consisted of 2 men,
Right.
me and my boss. So
Right.
we managed to handle this.
Yeah, but I'm talking, okay, so we're talking about different situations. I'm talking, I'll tell you what happened with me. It was in 1996, when you were 6, is that right? In 1996, we had bought Ducat 1, I bought Ducat 1 on Gashika. The people like you, these really annoying business continuity people, had come to me and said, you've got to put fireproof tiles on the roof. And I said, look, that's going to increase expenses, it's a perfectly good roof, well, you know, why do you bother me with this, you know, but okay, fine, so spend the money. And I have a picture, which is unfortunately not, it's in France, of the whole of the building next door, which was a tobacco factory, burning to the ground, and the fire coming out of the windows on Gashika, and the sparks landing on the roof and doing nothing because business continuity had put in the tiles. But that was 1996.
Sorry, yes, I confused it with multiple power outage at 2011.
Okay, no, but that's fine. But it's, and sorry, and the point is that Citibank had this. It's a great, by the way, I must get it because it's a great image. It's the image that says, if you haven't thought about it before, now it's too late. You know, the thing, which is what you know so well, which is why you're, and also, by the way, you were going to go on to say power interruption, right?
Yes.
Because you need to have a long enough battery supply. Because do you know how much your money is worth if the data goes? If your data is wiped out at the bank, do you know how much your money is worth? Sorry, do you know how much money you've got? Sorry, you don't have any money. I mean, you know, money is electronic data. Well, we've gone past, you know, maybe you've got gold in your safes at home. But if the data in the bank goes down, okay, now you're going to say, oh, but I've got statements. And then we're going to say, oh, but we went paperless 5 years ago. Now you only have data. And now our data center went down because there was a fire and because you didn't put in the 24-hour power supply battery, which allowed us to then, you know, move the data somewhere else. And so you haven't got any money anymore. So the financial systems are very, very keen on data, on continuity, and all that goes with continuity. I mean, I'm teaching you, and you could teach. You should come up here and teach the class. But you know, the fact is that when you look at, and so we're in Kenya. Hopefully, you did all this stuff. This is what you're going to be. You better have the best, you know, answer out of the. But of course, what did we do back in the Stone Ages in 1981? Well, first of all, we didn't have the internet. You know, we had computer tapes. You know, like you see in the old movies. You know, computer tapes. And we had to move, and we were required by Citibank to fly the computer tape out of the country every day. And I remember thinking, this is hugely expensive. Why are we doing it every day? Why can't we do it, you know, like once a month? And the answer is that if we did it once a month, and it was at the end of that month, and the coup happened, and there was a fire in the building, all of the transactions for that month would have been lost. So and then you have to recreate all those transactions. So in continuity management, it's about true instantaneous continuity. You can't, you know, you can't say, well, it's continuity in a month's time. It's continuity now. And in data terms, you have to have it somewhere safe. And luckily, and this is another point that I make here about crisis management, generally about management, is processes, when you're dealing with risk, processes are the mechanisms that cause you to take actions that deal with events that you can't foresee in a way that you've dealt with that risk ahead of time. And if you try and say, oh, but it's okay, you know, I'm going to react as soon as something happens, it's too late. Okay, what else do you have to do in that situation? So we've got operational risk, and then you mentioned counterparty risk.
Yeah.
What do you mean by counterparty risk?
some of our main critical suppliers may be also affected by this.
What's a critical supplier for a bank? I'll give you a clue. When you've got an economy and it's in Kenya and people are paid in cash, what's a critical supplier? The central bank with van loads of cash. You know, because actually if you go to your bank and you're paid in cash and you get to your bank and the bank says, sorry, we haven't got any cash.
But in this case, central bank can be substituted by anything else.
Sorry?
In this case, the central bank cannot be substituted by anything else.
You have other banks with cash in their vaults.
But it's limited. It's quite limited.
Of course it is. I mean, the point that I'm making, okay, talk about another counterparty risk.
Maybe some IT providers.
Well, you're talking about providers. The other counterparty risk in a bank is your client, right? And so what's happening actually in this environment, what's happening in the Kenyan environment, overnight,
They start panic.
well, there's a panic, there's the terms of trade disappear. You know, anybody shipping on open account, you know what shipping on open account means? I have, for instance, Bungi, the grain merchant, take their ships, great big ships, and they unload them, and then they get paid 30 days later once they've sold the grain. Now suddenly you have a coup, a cross-border event, political event. Suddenly I'm not unloading my grain till I get the cash. Because the moment the grain's in your country, I don't know who the authorities are, I don't know who the central bank is, I don't know who's in control of the transactions. And if you don't have grain, you don't have bread. And if you don't have bread, people go hungry. And if people go hungry, you've got a whole other level of problems. So actually it's quite interesting. I mean, if you're ever in an African country and you're in the grain business, you know what you do to make sure you're paid in these terms of trade? Is you take your boat and you park it directly offshore where the population can see it. And then the politicians, well, the people, the coup leaders or whoever it is that's running the country, understand that the population know, as they get hungrier and hungrier, that the food is just on the horizon. And they blame you, the coup leader, for not bringing them the grain. So one way or another, as the coup leader, you find a way of finding the money to pay for the grain to bring it in. That's just in case you're in the grain business and you run into a coup in Africa. But the terms of trade change means that the credits, the people that you've lent money to, they all suddenly are bad loans. I mean, when you are in a crisis, some people are hit worse than others, but the one thing about a crisis is it affects everybody. It affects some people less than others, but a macro event will affect everybody. And that means that when you are in the risk management, and in my case, I'm the corporate bank head, I can't deal with all of my clients all at once. See, this is the other thing about crisis management, is you have to, one of the things, the absolutely critical thing is prioritization. Doctors know this. You know, battlefield doctors know this. I guess doctors anyway know this. Because if you get a big road accident, or if you have a war, you know, the doors to the hospital open and in come 30 casualties. But you're only 2 doctors. So you may have to make triage decisions. And the triage decision is, these people are going to die, so we put them over there and we let them die. Because their injuries are too tough. Nothing we can do. Give them morphine, let them die. These cases are cases that will wait for 3 hours. So we'll put them over there, give them some morphine, and they can wait for 3 hours. And these people in the middle are urgent cases that we can save, but we have to act right away. But if you don't do that triage, as your 2 doctors or whatever the limited supply is, then the number of people that die is much greater, obviously, because you're not doing that prioritization. And the first thing that you have to do in a crisis, and I'm talking about as a banker, is to do a portfolio review. And you sit and of course, the other thing is, all of this is not done in the most pleasant environment. Your air conditioning doesn't work, there's corpses on the street, you don't know where everybody is, there's a skeleton staff, and by the way, this moment that happens to you, you either take it or you leave it. There's no sort of, I think I'll try and see what I can do. You either step up or you step out. And organizations understand that about people. I mean, I hope it never happens to any of you. It'll happen in some degree or another. What happened to me was because it was so radical, I had a choice. I could either step up or that was the end of that. Because somebody has to, because in a crisis, leadership is always important. The problem is, and we'll talk about it when we get to my successful failure, which I keep advertising, is that in a crisis, you become a crisis manager. You don't become a crisis leader. There's no such thing. Crisis leadership, it would be a lovely thing, but leadership requires time. It requires relationships. It requires the ability to inspire people. But if there's a fire in the corridor, I'm not going to say, now listen, there's a fire in the corridor, I want you to listen to me. It's going to get very hot. And when it gets really hot, then the carpet's going to start. I need you to understand this is going to be very painful. Don't bear with me, I know it's going to take a little while before you... No, of course not. I'm going to say, okay, there's a fire out there, put towels down over there, you people go out there. Well, actually, we're kind of screwed. If there's a fire out there, I think, we've got a whole other problem. But what I'm trying to tell you is that there's no time to go into some of the processes involved in leadership. And so you move directly into an authoritative relationship, which I was extremely good at, the best, at one of the biggest banks in the world, which led me to one of the worst leadership styles anybody can ever imagine, because I just couldn't turn that authoritative style off. So when I was put into a leadership role, I kept playing crisis manager, because that's what I'd done for so many years. Okay, what else is going to happen in Kenya? So we're dealing with the physical security, we're dealing with staff, we're dealing with continuity, we're dealing with, simple asset inventory. What's the state of the safe? What is this, you have to do an asset inventory, which is what is physically there. You then have to immediately, because the assets of the bank, there's an old saying in banking, oh, the assets of the bank leave every night in the elevators. Have you ever heard that saying? It's because you, the people, are the assets of the bank. See, so you, the people, you're the most important, assets in the bank. Actually, of course, it's pretty much true, except that you, the assets, without the technology, are kind of useless. So it's you, the assets, plus the technology. So the technology has to work, people have to be there, and then the other things that the assets of the bank are the willingness and capacity of the people that we lend the money to pay it back to us. Oh, and by the way, something else happens, because and it's like it's everybody's worst day. It's like if the wheel on your car comes off, then the steering wheel comes off, and then the horn goes, and everything happens at the same time. Because the other thing that happens in a crisis like that, do you think the depositors are just going to say, "Oh, no problem, we'll just leave the money in the bank"? Of course not. They're now all in front of the bank saying, "Where's our money?" The only problem is that we're talking about central bank deliveries have now been slowed down, not to say stopped. So you've got a vault. If you have a vault, if you're the manager of a vault, and I was when I started off as part of the training process, if you have cash in the vault, it's dead money. It doesn't earn money. Cash in the vault is sitting there, doesn't earn any interest, it's just dead money. So your job as a vault custodian is to maintain enough money that you can prevent a run on the bank. You know what a run on the bank is because you're Russian. Sorry, that's a very unpleasant, but you do because it happened in '98. So, but people come to the bank, they can't get the money out, so more people come to the bank. So as a vault manager, your job is to maintain enough money, but not too much. And actually, when I was running HSBC in 2008, I monitored how much cash was coming into the country, because it was quite an interesting... Oh, that's the other thing I want to tell you is, in a crisis, historic management systems don't work. A historic management system works in a business as usual environment. But as you move into a crisis, new dynamics come into the room. And as those new dynamics come into the room, the drivers of your business change. And if you are constantly relying on historic management information that worked in a normal environment, and you're in a new environment, you're going to be caught out. So, HSBC, I mean, I can't give away commercial secrets. HSBC had a large market share in the cash distribution business in Russia, along with Commerzbank. Those are the two, I'm talking back in 2007, 2008. Which meant that when you fly in on British Airways or Lufthansa or whatever, if the plane's empty upstairs, it's not empty downstairs. You know, physical cash, Russia does not print dollars. Russia does not print euros. Russia prints rubles. So if there's a need for incremental dollars or euros, they have to come from somewhere, and they come from European depots. And then they have to come into the country somehow, so they come in on planes. You don't ship money on boats, because it's dead, remember? The money's dead, it doesn't earn interest. So for every day it's on a boat, it's not doing anything. So you bring it in on planes. You don't, by the way, as the bank, absorb any risk on the ground. If the plane blows up in the air, it's covered by insurance. Once it lands, it's covered by insurance covered by the central bank or one of the other cash depots. So as a bank, this isn't a risk that you're taking. You're not taking money risk. I mean, they wanted to start doing cash depots, and you know, if there's one job I don't want, it's to be the guy that runs the bank with $100 million in a cash depot somewhere, because I'm going to have new and interesting friends very quickly. So, but I started checking what our daily shipment of cash was during that crisis. And don't forget that we were bringing cash in from London, well actually from other parts of Europe as well. We were bringing in cash to distribute to the Russian banks, because Russian banks relied on a foreign bank to bring in the cash. If I knew how much cash was coming in, I knew what the consensus was of how quickly the devaluation was going to occur next week. Because if the Russian bank vault custodians took the view that they needed, you know, if the average order was $100 million a day, and suddenly we were being asked for $200 million a day, then that was because the retail arms of the large Russian banks were going to their vault custodians, who were coming to us saying we need more cash because we can't afford that risk. And I had a chart, and unfortunately I can't show it because it's confidential, but I had a chart which showed the rate of increase of the cash deliveries, which pretty much matched the rate of increase or the devaluation of the ruble. And the reason I tell the story is that the key there was to think, well, I'm not going to get direct information on what all the Russian banks think, but maybe I can get proxy information about what all the Russian banks think. So it's about thinking, if I can't get the direct information and historic information is no longer valuable, what other indicators can I look to in whatever the industry is? So for instance, and then we need to take a break. So for instance, two ways of knowing if there's a crisis coming. First, if you see advertising companies advertising space in airports, it means that the contracts weren't renewed. So when you're in Domodedovo or in Sheremetyevo, and there is a advertising space that has on it, you can rent this space, you know, and then the name of the advertising company. It means that some marketing budget somewhere has been run out of, that they haven't adjusted their prices down yet because they're not reacting, and because as a retail banker or as any consumer marketing person will tell you, airport space is extremely valuable because you get a lot of transit and they have disposable income. So if that billboard is empty because nobody's hired it, take note. Second thing, if the cranes on the horizon aren't moving, see, people think, oh, if there's a recession it means there's no cranes, but then you don't understand the crane business. You know what I'm talking about, cranes, right? And
Tower cranes.
what?
Tower cranes.
With tower cranes. Okay? So people think, oh, when they look on the horizon, if there's lots of tower cranes, it means that there's lots of construction. No, it doesn't. It means that the people that rent out the tower cranes have rented them out, and the cost to decommission a tower crane is quite high. And it's the period between the time when they put the tower crane up and they realise that the recession really is there, and then the tower crane comes down. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to lead. The best way of getting a repayment of a bad loan in a bank is to know about that before anybody else. That's how you get repaid. The point that I'm trying to make for you here is crisis management is about knowing more than your competition before your competition and reacting faster than your competition. Because that's the way that you evade the problem. So if your competitors are looking out the window and they see the tower cranes and they go, well, it's okay, everything's okay, the tower cranes are up. But because you've been in a recession or two before and you know that unless those cranes are actually moving, it's only a question of time before the tower crane people come and remove them, but it won't happen immediately because that costs money. You get out of that construction loan now, your competitors will get out later. You save money. This is, sorry, I didn't mean to say that this is the only piece of advice I can possibly give you. But what I'm trying to say is think in your own industries of signals that are not historic signals, that are signals of things, of problems that are going to come, and then react extremely quickly to the problems that are going to come before the competition. Because everything in business is not in a vacuum. What you decide to do is relevant versus your competition, not in isolation. I think we need a break. I can tell that. I need a break too, because I went straight into Kenya. Before you can react to a crisis, of course you have to understand whether it is a crisis. Now, one of the problems is that if you go into crisis mode and there is no crisis, what happens? If I suddenly go into crisis mode, I go into crisis mode, so I don't lend money.
Crisis is going to start.
No, you may actually start a crisis, but I can tell you
Just for your company.
or for you, actually. I'll tell you exactly what happens, because it happened to me. In Puerto Rico, after I was moved out of Russia to Puerto Rico, actually I remember when I was moved, it was like, okay, I know where Russia is on the map, but I didn't even know where Puerto Rico was physically on the map. But I moved, when I went to Puerto Rico, actually it was quite a big Citibank franchise. There were like 2,000 people. And we've been on the island for a long time. And it was all about consumer spend. Puerto Rico was actually, when Cuba became communist, the Americans pumped money into Puerto Rico as a counterbalance to the communism that they saw as a domino effect in the Caribbean. So the Puerto Ricans were suddenly on the receiving end of massive amounts of American transfers. And after 2 years, and I was running the business there, after 2 years, and we were doing, what were we doing? We were doing nothing but building more condominiums and building more shopping centres and, lending more money for Puerto Ricans to buy expensive cars, and it was all money that was going into an island where there was no real productive capacity, there was some tax breaks, it just made no sense. And so I wrote to my boss and I said, listen, we have to get out of this real estate lending business because this country is going bankrupt because it doesn't have any sources of productive income apart from tourism and tax breaks. And my boss looked at it, and before he was able to respond, he was replaced. My boss was an Indian guy who ran Latin America, and the guy that replaced him, who ran the whole of Latin America from Argentina up, was a Puerto Rican. And so suddenly, I'm in a country, and Puerto Ricans are very, 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 very proud of their country for no particular reason that I can see of, but except that they're very proud of their country. And so I'd written this memo that said we've got to get out of Puerto Rico. I had, I think my direct staff were like 400 or 500. I had a staff meeting. I talked about it with the Indian guy. He'd agreed with me. I went out on stage. I said, ladies and gentlemen, it's great here. I just need to run you through some of the business facts. This is what's going on. And I went through what I considered an analysis of why we had to get out of lending. And my Puerto Rican boss, who was like a big, good-looking guy, he kind of salted onto the stage and he, hey, it was all in Spanish, it's, hey, how's it going, everybody? And everybody, of course, they were all responding to this guy. It's like, wow, you're back, because he'd worked there before. He said, we're going to double the amount of lending we're going to do. What? Then he just basically, what he did is he completely ignored my memo, which was very carefully crafted, and I thought that it had been approved by everybody. And then we got off stage, and I said to him, look, I can't even remember, Michael Contreras. Hello, Michael, wherever you are. And then we got off stage, and I said, listen, I'm sorry, I can't work for you. I said, I've been in this bank for 25 years. You have just taken a memo that I think makes a lot of sense, that your predecessor agreed with, and you've just ignored it in front of all of my staff. I have absolutely zero credibility. If you think that I have any ability to run this business when they think that you want to double it and I want to sort of halve it, obviously that's not going to work. And I was arrogant. Because I was a friend of the chairman of the whole of Citigroup worldwide. Because his wife was the best friend of my wife. And we all flew around on the G4 together, and we're in the helicopter together, and we went and had steaks at the chairman's house. And of course, people knew. I didn't mind the fact that people knew that I was, good friends with the chairman, because I was an idiot. Because I thought somehow, that this meant that I was untouchable. And the only thing it really meant was that everybody that was between me and the chairman was just waiting for an opportunity to get me. And I've been in the bank 25 years. So I fly up to, I've now resigned from my job. I fly up to New York. I phone up John Reed's secretary and I say, I need to see John. And she said, well, I'm sorry, John doesn't work here anymore. He'd been chairman of Citigroup for 13 years. And that was the month that he was removed from the board by Sandy Wilde, who'd done this big merger with Citigroup. So my big, buddy, he was never really a big buddy anyway. He wasn't there, and I was fired. That was it. Over. 25 years. Goodbye. To the day. 22nd of September 2000 versus 22nd of September 1975. Now, I told you that story. Actually, that story has a whole bunch of messages in it. Don't be arrogant. Don't rely on personal relationships with big bosses, because actually ultimately it didn't matter whether he was fired or not. I'm sure he would have supported. In a big organisation, you support that. You don't get insubordinate. My nephew's going through this at the moment. What I've told him is, if you have a direct conflict with your boss, the only thing I'll tell you for sure is, he'll get you before you get him. He may end up with a problem. You may watch him in the rearview mirror being dealt with and being removed from the company or whatever, but he'll get you first. I mean, unless you're incredibly lucky. So if you think that you're going to directly take on your boss just because you're right, sorry, if you think you're going to take on your boss just because you happen to be right, mostly that won't work out. I mean, that's just a point of view. Yes.
Oh, so just I would ask, if just imagine if you return to the past and those situations, would you change your decision to do what you have done?
You're not the first person to have asked that, and that's not the first time I've thought about that. You really have to read this book. I've really got to get you the book. I had 11 countries. I had 20 years in Russia. I wouldn't have had 20 years in Russia if I'd stayed at Citibank, because Citibank was never going to bring me back to Russia. If I stood my ground, I mean, there was these bad things that I had, the arrogance, the friendship, the this and that and the other, but I knew, I was a professional. I was 25 years in banking. I knew what I was talking about. Puerto Rico is now completely bankrupt, totally and utterly bankrupt, and anybody with any exposure has had to write it off. I was 15 years too early, which was actually the original point I was trying to make, which is that if you say it's a crisis and the crisis doesn't happen for a while, you can lose your job, which I did, you know. But would I have changed? I think you should stand up for what you truly believe in. And if you've got to the point where, and you have to be prepared to lose your job. I mean, if you aren't prepared to lose your job, then you have to understand that you're in a compromise situation. And that's okay, but get used to, but you have to be, don't fool yourself that, oh, you know, somehow you're doing the right thing, if actually what you're doing is just saving your job. If you believe something strongly enough and it's fundamental enough, then you have to be prepared to lose your job, I think. So, I think, boy, there's a lot of things I would have done, you know, there's a lot of things I would have done differently. That isn't one of them. And as it turns out, if I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have had the next 15 years in Russia. And so fate is a funny old girl, you know, or boy. You know, sometimes things make no sense at the time, and it's only when you play the film back again that things make sense. I mean, if you want another example, when Deripaska told me to leave Bank Soyuz at the end of 2007, I was absolutely incandescent. I was, how dare you? I've just built 3,500 people, you know, $500 million of assets, $500 million of deposits. I've just raised a Euro bond. I've just had us upgraded by S&P. I've created a bank. I've done it all. I replaced the whole of the management system. And now you're telling me I have to leave? How, I didn't say how dare you, because you don't say that to Deripaska, but I thought, how dare you? Okay. So then I left in December 2007. I was out of work, didn't know what to do. HSBC hires me as the CEO. By August of 2008, Bank Soyuz was completely bankrupt. If I had stayed in that job, I'd have had a very interesting conversation with a whole bunch of people. And actually, as it was, you carry criminal responsibility for 3 years as chairman of a Russian bank. But there was nothing I was directly involved in. And in fact, it went bankrupt for some other interesting reasons, which I don't want to get into right now. And by the way, it's now back on its feet and doing very, very well. Thank you very much. So sometimes when things make no sense at the time, when you run them back, and sometimes, by the way, you just screw up, you know, and then you just have to learn from the lesson. So to get back to the point I was originally trying to make, which is that when you call a crisis, you have to understand it has consequences. So when I called the crisis in Puerto Rico, it wasn't just, I got sidelined because I started talking about what happened to me. The reality that I really wanted to talk about is it didn't go bankrupt for 15 years. So Citibank, I mean, I was replaced and they kept lending money. They kept their portfolio flat, they didn't reduce it. And they made money on that portfolio for another 15 years. Now, actually, unfortunately, I don't know whether or not they then reduced the portfolio enough that when it went bankrupt, they didn't lose all the profit that they made. In the banking business, and the reason why I'm so cynical, and if you bring me your business plan, I'll tear it apart. I mean, you know, I'm the worst person to talk about venture capital with, because my whole life has been about protecting my 2 or 3% margin, because that's what bankers do. Except when I did leverage buyouts, because then I was making a much bigger margin. But generally, as a lending banker, I get 3%. If you're a venture capitalist, you make 1,000%. So of course, and that's why I like giving lectures with Rostic, you know, who owns Rostics, because he is a permanent optimist. Because his life has been about making. Now he's in trouble at the moment, but he has, you know, always been looking at 1,000% return on capital or something. And I've been looking at the maximum is I make 3% or I lose my capital. So of course I look at the downside. But calling a crisis has a consequence. But if let's talk about what constitutes a crisis. First, I can't. The trouble is my eyesight's so bad. I'm going to do it from here. One of the things that starts happening is things that used to happen start to no longer happen. So historic inputs don't have the same outputs, and you start to see. Well, we used to have a 7% per annum growth as a baseline. Well, that starts to move. The terms of trade used to be this. That starts to move. Rapid escalation of events and business as usual is at risk. I mean, what happens in a crisis is things don't slightly change, they start to rapidly change. And, you know, I was in Italy in 1993. I was sent to Italy to negotiate the biggest loan that we had in Italy, and then my client committed suicide, and then it was obvious that we had a slightly bigger problem than we thought we did. But then it became a problem for the whole of the Italian industrial elite. And one of the problems was that, you know, this started, you know, the guy, my client was, he won the America's Cup. If you look at the newsreels, he's one of the most handsome, you know, sporty, beautiful, success. He's the Prokhorov of Italy, and he suddenly blew his head off. And then suddenly, everything started to unravel. So when crises start to occur, they don't occur sort of in a nice, you know, slow kind of way. One thing happens after another, and you can't run quickly enough. And if you're running, my basic point to you is, if you're chasing the crisis, it's too late. You've got to find a way of being ahead of the crisis. If you're chasing the crisis will beat you. These are my experiences. It can be limited to one of your business lines, but the fact is that actually, generally, crises have contagion. They affect across a whole range of businesses. So what happens is that you start to see the fire over here, but actually what happens is that the contagion brings it across all your business lines. And more than just this shift in capital, is that this is why it makes it so exciting. That's why I really recommend getting involved in crises. Is because crises it's like they throw everything into the air. In a normal business environment, you're going to manage maybe a little bit more market share here, maybe a little bit more profit margin there. You know, you're going to slightly squeeze out some more technology. In a crisis, what's happening is people are going to go bust. Big market shares are going to open up. You're going to run in a situation where the incrementalization of stuff doesn't happen that way. It's survival. And when you get into survival, big market share opportunities open up. A lot of the issues around a crisis happen as, you know, there's the good news, bad news. A lot of people, when they get into a crisis, rely on their past crisis experience. I mean, I've had many crises experience. And so what you say is, well, this is a crisis, and this is what happens in a crisis, so I'm just going to play this crisis the way I played the last crisis. But what's interesting about crises, of course, like wars, is that they all have similarities and they're all very different. And there are some things that happen in a crisis that are the same across all, and some things that will be very specific to that particular crisis. One of the other points that I make here is a fundamental, it's the oxygen, that's, when you have that oxygen and you're 80 or 50 meters down, you have to make those decisions between strategic and tactical. And by that I mean, how much of your workforce are you going to lay off? How much of your capital expenditure are you going to reduce? How big a chunk are you going to take out of your normal strategic investment so that you conserve cash? Cash is oxygen. In a crisis, the guy with the oxygen wins. Because don't forget, never forget, you're operating in a competitive environment. So if I've got the working capital and you don't, you're out of business and I've taken your business. If I get it wrong and I cut my staff and I cut my investments, but there's no crisis, or the crisis isn't as severe as I thought it was, you're going to take my market share. Because you're going to hire my people, you're going to build your machinery, you're going to get the productive capacity that I don't have, and you're going to build your market share against mine. So a lot of this is about taking a view. A crisis doesn't allow you the luxury of, let's see how it goes. You know, that is not an option. You have to take a view. And I think, and the urgency, the general urgency. So then you have different types of crisis, of course. Now, you know, they start, this is just working its way down. You know, crises can be global. Global warming is pretty much a global crisis. They can be macroeconomic, which affects, now a macroeconomic crisis, as we're experiencing now, can affect all the emerging markets. or it can affect Eastern Europe, or it can affect Russia. So macroeconomic simply means it affects, it's bigger than your industry, it's bigger than your country. Political, is self-obvious, is self-evident. Industry is that this is how localized the crisis is. It may be that the buggy whips. You know the story of buggy whips. You know buggy whips. If you're in horse and cart, you need a whip to keep the horses going. Well, the best year for buggy whip sales was the year before the car suddenly took the market share. So the most profitable buggy whip manufacturers had a great year just before they went bust. So an industry thing can be very specific, and that was also matched with technology. Now, company, of course, some of these crises are internal, external, unique, or systemic. Because an internal crisis can be a management crisis. You happen to have a CEO that takes your business in the wrong direction. Well, that's a company crisis. It's not an industry crisis. It's a specific crisis. Maybe he borrowed too much money. If it's external, it could be that you're running a perfectly good business, but there's a subprime mortgage collapse, and suddenly the capital markets dry up. And if your business model is that you borrow on the markets, well, the markets aren't there anymore, and you're out of business. So that's an external. It can be unique or it can be systemic, i.e. it can be specific to your company, or it can be across all the companies in that sector. The rest is bigger. Forward-looking radar. This is this business of, if you're going to call a crisis, I keep saying it, you have to be ahead of that crisis if you can. So it's forward-looking radar. What can you go? Can you spot the cranes on the horizon? What is it that you can develop in your industry that allows you to take action ahead of your competitors? And the other question that you're going to have to take a view on is how quick is how long is this? What is the shape of this? That's why in 2007 everybody was saying, is it a V? Is it a W? Is it is it an L? That's not a good one. What is the shape of the recession? What is the shape of this crisis? Because depending if it's a V, and actually it turned out that 2008-9 was a V for Russia, way down, very quickly back up again. Because the markets were waiting, leverage was waiting, demand was waiting. So if you'd suddenly cut out huge amounts of your capital expenditure, if you'd suddenly fired a whole bunch of your staff, you had to come back in and hire them all again very quickly. And of course it's expensive to bring them back, and that puts you behind the competition. Impact on decision making. Yeah, I think I'm going to make it to 10. I'm not going to make it to 10:30. We talked about impact on decision making being that you don't do anything. In physical situations, people actually react. Did you saw the case in between Amsterdam and was it Amsterdam or Belgium? The train with the terrorist with the AK-47 that didn't work. Did you read that? Wow.
Train from Paris to Amsterdam.
I think it was the other way around, Amsterdam to Paris. Oh, okay. Paris to Amsterdam. Okay, so basically it was a very, very simple scenario. You had poor old loser terrorist who was armed to the teeth with he had a Stanley knife, he had a pistol, and he had an AK-47, and he had a whole bunch of ammunition. So he goes into the bathroom and he loads his AK-47, and a Frenchman's coming by, hears the sound of a gun being loaded, tries to grab the gun. The terrorist manages to shoot the first guy. There are 3 young Americans on the train. 2 of them one's in the Air Force and one's in the Army, I think. And their first reaction, it was a reaction. They weren't the rabbit in the headlight. Everybody else in that train was a rabbit in the headlight because they were in a crisis and they didn't know what to do. These guys were through their training. They knew that they had to do something or they were going to die. And if they did something, they might die too. But at least if they were doing something, they had a chance of survival, or at least of changing the outcome. So these 2 guys run up to the guy with the AK-47, The guy with the AK-47, he's a real loser. You know, he goes to fire, misfires for whatever reason. Oh, actually, I saw an interview where the guy had the shell where it actually had misfired. It wasn't that he didn't have a bullet in the breech, it actually misfired, it didn't go bang. And because it didn't go bang, he didn't get killed. He grabs the guy, he wrestles him to the ground, the guy then pulls out his Stanley knife, stabs him. Okay? Then his friend turns up and they club him into unconsciousness and tie him up. Now, the reason for the story is that the rabbits in the headlight were everybody else. Because they had no prior experience, they had no training, they didn't have the skill base, and they were reacting in the way that most people react when faced with huge amounts of danger that's unexpected, which is, I'll do nothing. And the guys that got up and did something, did it because of their training, which is the reason why the army trains the people to do things like that. So, most situations, rabbits in the headlight. Secondly, what happens is, people say, oh, I've seen this before, and therefore I know what to do, because it's seen through the prism of your experience. And I still don't have my coin to make that point. But the fact is that people take their prior experience and they use it to interpret actions. And there's nothing wrong with this. The point about this is that if the crisis has significantly different dynamics, it causes you to take action that might actually make things worse. Very important. One of my fundamental sayings is, don't let the urgent crowd out the important. Don't let urgent things stop you doing important things. And it's a very simple reason why. If you let urgent things crowd out important things, when the important things become urgent, you can't do them. So if you have a list of 10 things to do, and one of them is important, and you are always busy with the 9 other things because they are easy to do and urgent, when that one important thing comes up, and it's finally become urgent, you're out of luck because you haven't got time to deal with it. Now what's interesting about, a simple example of that is, in every Citibank job I had, in every market I came to, I was required to do a target market survey. Now, a target market survey is it's a bit of a pain in the arse. But what does it say? It says, what is the economy, what are the constituents of the economy, what are the industries in the economy, who are the players in the economy, what are the trade flows in the economy, what are the products that are being sold in the economy, what are the dynamics of the products that are being sold in the economy, what are the risk factors of the products that are being sold, what is the capacity to deliver those risk products. So you can see I've done it before. But the fact is, it's a lot of work. And when you arrive, you sit there and you go, hey, I've got to fire this person, I've got to hire this person. Oh, there's, this problem's come up. Oh, there's this client to meet. Oh, I've got to go off and socialize with somebody else. That target market survey, I'll leave it till tomorrow. And then you've got senior management that suddenly appear on your doorstep and they say, can we see your target market survey? Because obviously you thought about where you want to strategically position the business. And then you're out of luck because it's too late to do your important thing. Now what's interesting, really interesting about a crisis, is it reverses that. It actually takes urgent things and makes them important. And the reason why these urgent things become important is, if you die tomorrow, you don't get to live the day after. So if you run out of cash, if you screw up your emergency reaction to the crisis, it doesn't matter if you've got a long-term strategy because you're not going to get that. And so it's this is where crisis management becomes really addictive, because suddenly I'll take a typical example of how that works. Is that when you're doing restructurings, you have something that's called a standstill agreement. And a standstill agreement basically says that, imagine you're all banks and you've all lent money to Rusal in 2007. And in 2008, the market's gone to hell, and now we've got some banks over here that have lent $2 billion, some banks here that lent $100 million, some banks over here only lent $10 million. And suddenly it looks like bankruptcy is coming. Well, what's the first thing, do you think, that the people with $10 million do? It's very obvious. They say if you don't pay, they say to the guys with $1 billion, we only have $10 million outstanding, so all you have to do is pay us off, and we won't pull the plug on this company. Because if we pull the plug on this company, we're going to lose 10 million, and you're going to lose $1 billion. And the temptation for your guys is, oh my God, we're going to lose $1 billion. Okay, pay them off. But you know what? The first time you pay off this guy with 10 million, the guy sitting next to him with 15 million, what's he going to do? And the guy next to him with 50 million, what's he going to do? So you have to create an environment where nobody gets paid out, and everybody gets treated in the same way. Now I've run these restructurings for like 3 or 4 years, and the pressure, because every day there's a maturity. There's a bank. The biggest case I had was $2.5 billion with 108 banks now. So if you have 108 banks, there's a maturity somewhere, sometime going on every day. And if one of those, if you don't get, you see, because you have to take them in a corner. This is what you do in a restructuring. You take them in the corner and you say, oh, you've got 10 million and you think you're going to bring down the rest of the syndicate. Really? Can I remind you that you're part of a global economy, and over in this loan over here, you've got 100 million and we only have 3. So why don't you try your luck, chum? And you can pull down this syndicate, and you know what's going to happen next week? You've got a $100 million loss over there. And it's straight blackmail. It's crude, it's hard work, it's very tiring, but every single day you have to roll that loan over. And that's what I mean by the urgent becomes more important than that the urgent crowds out the important, which is the opposite of the way it normally is. Because in a crisis, short-term problems can create an interruption that can threaten the long-term strategy. Historic management says, well, if you start from the assumption that the crisis is taking the past no longer represents the future. Basically what's happening is that things that worked in the past, the connectivity between things that worked in the past and will happen in the future, that no longer exists. And therefore, if you're relying on historical management, by the way, audited accounts, they're great things to have, but they're not predictors of what's going to happen tomorrow. Because you're going to get them 120 days after they've occurred. And if the situation has changed enough, and market share is changing enough, historic measurement systems don't work. So you've got to replace them with something else, generally management accounts, for instance. Danger of information overload. Particularly where in crisis management, lines of communication have to get shortened. Remember what I said about the fire. We're not in the game of let me devolve power to you, let me delegate. Why don't I give you this opportunity? Maybe you could make a mistake, maybe not, but come back to me in a month. That's business as usual. There's a fire, you'll do this now, you'll do it by tomorrow, and you'll come back and tell me that you've done it. So not only are you directly controlling people, but you're having to do it on a very tight time frame. And because what you're doing is you're dealing with people who are outside their normal experience level, you can't give it to them and assume that they can do it, because it's outside their normal experience level. So your cycle time is do it by tomorrow, and I'm going to check that you've done it. Because if I don't check that you've done it, you may not have done it the right way, because this is a new environment. Now, if you imagine the amount of pressure that builds up, because you are now right in the center of all of these decisions. And if you then come back to my concept that short-term problems can escalate very quickly, it's like taking 3 oranges and juggling, then 4 oranges and juggling, and then 10 oranges and juggling. It becomes quantitatively more difficult, because if you drop one of them, it could be a radical problem for you. So danger of information overload, simply actually running out of space. And this is where creating efficient work habits and knowing how to prioritize in a crisis is so important. New risks, well, we've sort of covered that. Stress causes overreaction and inefficiencies. People don't react well to stress. And even well-trained people, if you keep them up all night, if you put them under enormous stress, they start to make mistakes. And the more mistakes they make, they get into a negative cycle. And then they lose efficiency. And then most of all, they lose confidence. And you know, it's like the moment you've lost confidence, if you've lost confidence, you have to keep going back to the center to regain your confidence. But you're doing it with a guy that's in the middle of this web of ever-increasing, you know, I can talk about this quite viscerally because I've been in the situation. It gets to the point where you, because in general terms, you should always close your door and have a rest. You need a rest. In a crisis, you often don't get that at all. There's no break because there are too many decisions that are going on. This is not a recommended management style. Danger of denial. There are some problems that I had. Milan '93. I talked a bit about that. Milan '93. I'll do this for another 5 minutes or so. Do any questions so far? I mean, I can see that the room's kind of dead. We haven't been doing a dialogue really, which is a problem. Questions? Comments? So in '93, the problem was that, what happened was I was doing leverage buyouts, but that one of our biggest loans was this guy, a very handsome guy, but whether he was handsome or not doesn't matter. He was perceived as very successful. Unfortunately, he had a big hole in his balance sheet. And that meant that when we went to investigate it, I can tell you a little cultural thing. Here's a cultural thing. So I turn up in Milan, and I take my English lawyer with me. And we go into a palazzo in the center of Milan, which is Mediobanca, which is one of the oldest banks in Italy. And we have a confidentiality agreement, which is what you start with, in any conversation. You have to get the confidentiality agreement signed. So we go in, we walk into the door, and the guy who's the Mediobanca banker, the Italian guy, is the son of the head of Fiat. And my supposedly English lawyer is an Italian, because he's working in Italy. And he puts a piece of paper across to the guy on the other side of the table, and the other guy on the other side of the table throws it away. And he looks at my guy. My lawyer's there to protect me, right? And he looks at my guy, and he goes, I can't do an Italian accent, but he goes, well, I can, but it's very bad. He goes, my father knew your father, his father knew his father. We have been together for 3 generations. You come to my house and you give me a piece of paper on behalf of this American bank. Who do you think you are? And I turned to my tough, English-trained lawyer. He's just disappeared. I mean, he was completely intimidated by being in an Italian context and being asked to do an Anglo-Saxon transaction, which was a very, this is just the way we do business. Eventually we signed a piece of paper. But one of the things that was very interesting in this situation was that in Italy in '93, they hadn't had a recession. So we'd had this recession, from '89 to '90 in the UK. It hadn't hit Italy. So I had lending officers who weren't young. They were like 40 years old. And they had never seen a downturn. So when I turned up, and I was in '94, I don't know, I was 40 something. And I turned up and I said, we've got to take urgent action against these borrowers because they're going down. One of the other things that happen in a crisis is denial. And people come up with a plan, and the plan is denial. It can't possibly be this bad, it's going to get better, give it another week. And so I would get into these long conversations about, no, this is what's going on, we have to ask for our money back, we have to take security, we have to increase our pricing, and we have to do it now. And if we don't do it now, one of the things you try and do, by the way, this was too late because the crisis was already happening. If the crisis is coming and you're a banker, you do two things. You increase your pricing, and you make life miserable for your borrowers. And then if you increase your pricing enough and you make life miserable enough, then they go to another bank. and that's it. No more bad bank, no more bad loan problem because they find somebody else that pays you out. That's a traditional way of dealing ahead of time with a crisis. But in this situation, one of the other factors that you need to deal with in a crisis is how to overcome inertia. People, it's not just that people in a crisis are like rabbits in a headlight. People have habits. They have relationships. They know their clients for 5 years. They don't want to take aggressive action. They don't want to take action at all, in fact. They just want to hope for the best and hope it gets better. And so the way that you need to manage through that process is by creating deadlines that, you say to them, listen, we have a week. If within that week certain things haven't happened, we have to agree you take the next action. And then you force that through. It's not a very pleasant process. And by the way, of course, the other thing is it's not just your staff that you have to deal with, it's your client base. And if the client base hasn't accepted that there's a crisis, they're going to have the same blinkered view as your own management. So, maximize relevant information, understand the new drivers, create a steering committee in a crisis. The trouble with a steering committee is, or the fact of life of the steering committee is, that a steering committee can't be too big. We can't be a steering committee. We don't have time. I can't go round this room and make this room react to the information. I could, maximum number, 9, 10, maybe. So that means some people have to be outside the room. People have to be outside the room that think they should be in the room. So now you've got a morale issue. But you can't, and then let's circle back to how it's nice to be the leader that's friends with everybody. Imagine if you're managing your company on the basis that you're friends with everybody, a crisis breaks out, and then you say, okay, these 10 people are in the steering committee, and I'm afraid you guys have to leave the room. But you're my friend, what do you mean? It's not fair, You can't afford that, you don't have time for that. So a steering committee has to be small enough and relevant enough, and as I say, sometimes exclude people that think they should be in the room. Set triggers, I was just talking about. If you need a relationship and you think at the time that you need the relationship, if you haven't built it, it's too late. Relationships get built over many years. I mean, I'm going to be quite interested on the 18th of November because I'm inviting my relationships for the last 20 years to a party. So for 20 years I've had relationships across all these banks and whatever. I'm very interested to see how many people turn up. I mean, I'm hopeful that quite a lot of people will turn up because the point I'd make about relationships is, I did it 2 weeks ago. Take the guy who just lost his job out to lunch. He'll remember you. Call the person that just had a big deal blow up on them because they'll remember you. There was actually, I think one of the Lazard guys said, I never call people when they're successful because everybody else is calling them. I only call people when they fail to say that they're good guys and that they should keep going. Because the people that call you when you fail are the people you remember. I mean, it's not completely true because you remember the people that call you when you're successful too. But when you're successful, everybody's your friend. When you failed, you remember your friends. So this point that I'm making here about relationships is relationships become key in crisis because you need people to go over and above what they would normally do. But if you think that in the middle of a crisis you're going to call up the head of another bank and say, hey, Joe, it's been years, I haven't spoken to you for 3 years. How's the family? How's the dog? Oh, the dog died. Oh, never mind. But how's life, Oh, by the way, I was wondering if you could give me a $50 million loan. No. Forget it. So relationships are key, and the key to maintaining relationships is that it's like watering your plant. You can't not water it 1 month, because when you go back, it's dead. You have to keep flexible. Crises change. They don't, when I said you've got to take a view on the crisis, it would be jolly nice if a crisis was going to look like this and didn't change. But actually, the risk factors will impact it and will change the dynamic of it. And if you've got a rigid crisis response plan that isn't going to take account of how those dynamics change, well, as they change, you're going to be left with an out-of-date reaction. So you have to be prepared to revise your potential scenarios. In any crisis, people are hungry for information. And the danger in a crisis situation, the danger you have to avoid is you might think that people want to hear good news, which is a mistake. It's not that people want to hear bad news, they want to hear what is the real situation. So if you go into the room thinking, it's the same thing with this business of I want to be your friend. You know, if everybody, I want to be your friend. So everybody. You can't, it doesn't work like that. You have to go into that room, tell them the way it is, and then be prepared to continue to say, well, it was bad last week, it's bad next week, but these are some of the things that are getting better, and these are some of the things that are getting worse. Because the one thing you cannot afford to lose in this scenario is your credibility. Because the day that you've lost your credibility, when you then go back into the room again, and you say, oh, you remember last week when I said things were getting better? Well, they didn't. Well, next week they'll get better. And then what are you all going to think? You've got to, whatever you do in this scenario, you've got to remain credible. And you've got to remain, I mean, this is a sort of Russian thing as well, by the way. You've got to have the body language of leadership. You can't collapse into yourself. You can't let yourself, I mean, of course you're under enormous pressure. Of course, you know, stress will come out in different ways. But generally people want you to look like you're in control. Because if you look like you're not in control, your hair's everywhere, your tie's all over the place, you haven't shaved, you know, you may know what's going on, but the projection that you're giving is somebody that's out of control. I'm not saying, by the way, that as long as you comb your hair and shave, keep your tie, that everything's fine. And that's not the only thing you have to do. Don't procrastinate. Once it's time to act, get on with it. Oh, make sure you keep accurate notes. Make sure that you understand what's going on, because when it's over, and it's important when it's over, is that you have to analyse what worked and what didn't work. If you simply get through the crisis, and when the crisis is over, you go, phew, thank goodness, you know, and you never try and work out what worked and what didn't work, you're not absorbing the lessons. And when we get to successful failure, one of the things I'm going to keep telling you is that the point about successful failure is to learn the lessons. It's not whether or not you fail, it's whether you learn the lessons. The same is true in a crisis. If everybody in the room is motivated to book assets, and you go into a crisis, and actually what you've got to do is get recoveries, can't book any more assets, and you don't change people's key performance indicators, well, obviously people, you're going to, you know, nobody in the room gets paid. So how motivated are they? You've got to change the KPIs. And never forget you've got competitors. Reaction time, final slide. With what the difference between winners and losers? Reaction time and the ability to understand and adjust to the new realities. Oxygen, financial resources. Relationships with key constituents, which you don't make at the time that you need them, you make them before you need them. Luck, because you can't, that's, I'm afraid, something that you're going to need, which I can't offer you, but it will have an impact. How you perform relative to your competitors. It isn't just about how you perform. If your competitors perform better than you, well, you're going to lose market share. So, dynamics with competitors. Oh, core competences. When this crisis is over, if you've lost your core competence, you're not going to bounce back. So maintaining your core competence is a critical part of this. Flexibility. If things are changing and you're not able to change with them, you're going to be rigid, and then you're going to be hit. And leadership. Leadership in a crisis is more important than in any other situation. Comments, questions? Are we done for the evening? I'm here. Any questions? Any comments? This was not an academic lecture. I could pull up my show you all the scars of all the different crises. It's not a pretty sight. Yeah.
I have one question regarding to administrative expenses. Administrative and management expenses in the case of crisis start. What shall we do? So the one option is to reduce, as all expenses should be reduced in order to have enough oxygen.
Yeah.
So from the other point, if we reducing so management and administrative expenses, there is a risk of the lack of quality of management. So in the crisis situations, so it's some kind of trade-off. What do you think could be the thinking logic in this case?
Having the 5-course meals with the poulet montrachet and the waiters with the white gloves, that has to stop. In other words, I'll work my way through it. There are some things that you can do which indicate that you understand that life is different. And that's why getting rid of corporate jets and stuff is one of the things that people have to look at. You can't afford, people look to management to lead. And if the guys are having their 3-hour lunches in the boardroom with the white gloves and the beautiful wine, and nothing seems to have changed, and yet they're issuing instructions across all the the operating departments that they've got to take out 30% of the workforce. That's not going to work. So you have to work out, when you say, how do we deal with, overhead? That's basically what you're saying. It's this thing about how deep into the bone you cut. If you cut too deeply and the crisis is too short, then you've lost your market share. If you cut too thinly and the crisis is long, then you've lost your oxygen. So, and there's no formula for this. What I would say is that the moment that you've identified that it's a real crisis, you have to take a view. You can't, in a crisis, not take a view. You can't say, oh, it's a crisis, let's see how it goes. Maybe it'll be okay, maybe it won't, let's see how it goes. Once you've got something that you understand as a crisis, you have to take a view. This is a crisis, it's going to last for 6 months. Or you can take the view, I don't know enough. And I'm going to take a 3-month view, and this is what I'm going to do in 3 months, but within 3 months I'm going to have a longer term view. So that's acceptable. But whatever you do, you can't say, oh, it's a crisis, let's see how it goes. In terms of the balance between direct costs and indirect costs, I mean, it's normally a crisis is a really good way to make your organisation lean. It's a very good excuse to get rid of layers of management. And so a lot of leaders take the opportunity in a crisis to take out a lot of expenses that would be more difficult to do in a normal environment. And so if you're going to, and cash is king. And if you're going to err on anything, and it's like one of the things I used to tell clients, which of course I should never do as a banker, is I'd say, whatever you do, draw down all your working capital lines. You know what a working capital, an overdraft. You have short-term borrowing lines, right? So the bank says to you, we will give you, 6-month money, as long as you pass the covenants and the pricing is this and that and the other. If you really think there's a crisis coming, as the banker, I'm going to cut all those lines. Because if you draw it down and you go bust, I've just lost that money. So and I've actually done this as a banker. I've actually gone around, and of course this is dangerous because you lose relationships. And people remember when you just cut their lines. But then when I've been advising companies in a crisis, running into a crisis, I always say, first thing you do is you draw down your money and you put the money in another bank with no offset agreement. And now, if the bank wants to get the money back, they have to make you bankrupt. And banks never make you bankrupt because you never get your money out in a bankruptcy. So now you've got their money in another bank, you make sure there's no cross guarantees, you've got liquidity in the other bank to make payments, and you've got a very angry bank over here who has a loan, but they know that if they pull you down for bankruptcy, they're not going to get their money back. Yeah, and which sort of I'm just looking at this camera thinking, oh shit, I can just see Citibankers going, Jesus. But you know, this is another fact of life, which is you're in the jungle, it's survival. Have you got the running shoes? You know, have you got the running shoes? You only have to run faster than the competition. And so, you know, now, having said that, because life luckily is quite complex. If you ruin all your relationships by doing what I've just told you to do, and then the crisis turns out to be short term, and then you go back to the first bank and you say, oh sorry, just kidding, you know, you're not going to get the next loan. And you've just ruined that relationship. And the money that you put with the new bank, you know, that's not going to be any use to you, because the new bank's going to see how you reacted. So they're going to say, well, hang on, if this is the sort of, you know, management that you are, why would we want to lend you any money? Whoops, now you've got a problem. So when you take crisis requires dramatic action, crisis requires you to be ruthless, and crisis requires you to make a judgment call between what's a relationship and what is survival. And if you take survival action with a relationship, be aware that you've damaged that relationship quite significantly.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. Being a free fall during crisis, how many?
So
Being a free fall during crisis, how many confirmation of future rebound do you need? Are you looking for first one or second one, or more confirmation?
There's going to be a rebound.
Some rebound that can bounce, or
Well,
also rebound.
I mean, if you took Russia just by chance, whenever Russia has gone into some major decline, it's always been a good buying opportunity. Right? So on some level, you know, the deeper the discount, the bigger the upside. The question is, how long is your time? It's like you know, if you take a short position in the market, you just have to last long enough that you can actually get to the short. If you take a hold position in an asset, you A, have to last long enough that the bounce comes back, and B, sorry to say, you have to take the assumption that the systemic changes that occur don't mean that you get wiped out. You know, I mean, I don't think we're in that territory at all. But if you really wanted to be the risk manager somewhere, you could start saying, well, actually, how far down the road politically do you get to the point where you get expropriated? You know, never try and call the bottom of a crisis. Never try and call the top of a peak, because you'll never get it. Yeah, as any investor will tell you, take the money that you can take, and take the first loss that you have to take. But don't try and get out. You know, don't try and buy in at the very, very bottom, because you'll never get there. And don't try and wait till the very, very top, because you'll not get there either. Yeah.
Speaking about early signs of the crisis, like rates on the horizon.
I just use it as an example.
Oh, okay. You named two.
Yeah.
Are there any other specific?
Oh God, there's hundreds. Are you looking to? You're going to take notes and see whether or not you can see it.
No.
I mean, it's inventory build-up. Inventory build-up. I mean, you know, you monitor people's inventory, right? You know what days inventory is, how many days sales of inventory you have, what the turnover cycle is, right? So if you're in the business of financing working capital, and you know, by the way, as a banker, you should always go visit your clients. Okay, so people that think that they can understand what's going on by reading the accounts, they're idiots. You know, the only way you understand what's going on is when you get out of the car and you walk into the warehouse, and then you always walk into the warehouse to the door they don't want to show you. Okay, so when you're on a plant visit as a banker, right? What normally happens is they get some attractive girl or they get some charming man, and they talk to you all the time and they show you around their plant, and they want to take you past the nice low inventory, the nice well organized work in progress, And I remember once, you know, I mean, in Egypt, you know, I was walking along with this person, and then there was this door with a double padlock on it. And I said, well, boy, this is really interesting, you know, low stock levels, everything's fine. What's behind the door? Oh, you know, nothing, it's where we keep except. No, I said, but I'll tell you what, you know, we're financing pretty much all your working capital. What's behind the door? Oh, but I don't have the keys. I said, that's fine, I'll wait. You know. So, you know, we waited. The guy finally went to get the keys, double padlock, opened the door. And behind there, it was a food importing company. And behind there were all the out-of-date canned goods that they had as current inventory. They listed it as current inventory, but when you looked at it, the cans were all about to explode. You know, because it was out of date. Right? So I mean, that's not a. I'm just talking about that's actually due diligence. But what I'm talking about in terms of a warning sign is that if you have a certain level of inventory, which is your normal inventory, and that inventory starts to build up, well, that's telling you that sales are coming down. But that's telling you sales are coming down perhaps before you actually see the sales figures. So actually, for instance, if you go to a factory, if the production capacity is at the same level, you know, they don't put in a new production line. You have 2 production lines. They're working 2 shifts or 3 shifts. So how many shifts are they working? If they're working, let's say they're working 2 shifts, because that's sort of a normal without the overtime. So 2 shifts and a certain level of working capital. You physically see it. You see the inventory, right? Boxes of inventory, finished goods. You go in there and the boxes are twice as big as they used to be. You know, there's twice as many of them. But the production hasn't increased. But you haven't seen the sales figures yet because they haven't been made available. Well, you know they're not selling as much as they used to. Do you see what I mean? And so it can be technical or it can be visual or it can be. But the point is to think through what is it that happens before the other thing that I hear about happens that lets me know. So, for instance, if I'm the bank that goes to the factory and looks at the inventory and the other bank doesn't, the other bank's relying on quarterly figures that are 120 days old. I'm relying on what I see on the factory floor, and I see that the factory levels have gone up. I'll tell you one more story and then we'll call it quits. This is a due diligence story. It's a very simple story. So in Egypt, when I arrived in Egypt, there was another crisis, blah blah, and you know we weren't getting repaid loans. So I was sitting with my Egyptian account officers, and we had a guy called Mr. Mitkis. Mr. Mitkis was an envelope manufacturer. Well, envelope manufacturing. What do you need to do to manufacture envelopes? You buy paper. You have a machine that goes ka-chunk, ka-chunk. It's not a very complicated machine. It goes ka-chunk, ka-chunk, and then out come the envelopes. So he had, and I think the machine cost like $1.2 million. And he had brought it in, and somebody had actually made the argument that this was trade finance. It was going to generate a lot of extra income because we did it with a letter of credit. So we made a one-time letter of credit, 1.2 million. And then they'd done some analysis on what his profitability would be, and from going ka-chunk for like 2 years, it was going to repay the loan. This was 5 years later. And the loan hadn't actually gone down, it had gone up. And so I said, has anybody actually, you know, gone to visit Mr. Mitkis, you know, to see the factory? And they said, well, no, because you know, it's only 1.2 million. Well, I said, it isn't 1.2 million, it's now 2.5 million. But we haven't had time. So we get in the car, we go across, you know, we drive across Cairo, which is always fun, and we get to a residential square. And I'm thinking, well, this is odd, you know, here's a residential square where the guy has decided to build a factory. And as we go into this residential square, the average height of the buildings were like 3 stories, you know, 3-story buildings. Except in a corner, there was like a 12-story skyscraper. And at the bottom of the skyscraper, there was a machine that was going ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And instead of repaying the loan, he'd simply built, you know, an apartment building. And so actually what we had was that we didn't finance an envelope manufacturer, we financed an entire apartment building. And in fact, if any account officer at any time had got in a car and driven across town, they would have seen it, you know, being built stage by stage by stage. And when I talked to Mr. Mitkis and I said, you know, Mr. Mickey, I thought we agreed that, you know, you were going to repay the loan. He said, well, nobody ever really asked me to. Brilliant. Anyway, okay. So, the next time we meet is the 24th at 11 o'clock, yeah? Is that right? And what we'll do, because I didn't do the characteristics, it's a little awkward because Dan's coming, so I'll talk to him. I think we have several hours. I'm going to do the interview with Dan to talk about his leadership and how he's created it. And by the way, please ask as many questions. You know, I'd be more than happy if you asked more questions than I did. But I get it going by asking questions. Then we're going to talk about the characteristics that come out of that. And then I'm going to talk about successful failure, because that will then at least bring it into some sort of perspective, which is at least my personal journey of how I was able to move from a situation where I didn't learn the lessons to eventually a situation where I did. So that's the plan. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.